Hello, my darlings. Welcome to the Ghoulish Garden. Today we're actually going to be staying indoors because we're going to talk about how to make a pie from a pumpkin that you grew yourself. If you did not grow pumpkins in your yard this year, this process will absolutely work for any store-bought sugar or pie pumpkin. Just a quick note on harvesting these, if you are growing them yourself. You want to wait until the whole surface is pretty well orange. It will turn from a green to an orange slowly. And also, you can push your thumb in onto the rind, thumbnail, and it shouldn't give too easily. It should feel pretty firm. At that point, you can go ahead and cut that stem off as close to the vine as possible to give a lot of stem on there. You want to keep a lot of stem on there because the pumpkin is going to continue to draw nutrients even from this piece of stem. Once you've harvested your pumpkin, you want to put it outside in a sunny location for at least 3 or 4 days. Some people will leave them out there for up to a week. What this does is it actually sort of hardens off the rind a little bit, and it's called curing the pumpkin. It's just part of saving your pumpkin and getting it prepped for cooking. It will allow you to store these pumpkins for a few months, even if you really let it cure and you put it in kind of a cool, dark place. And the other thing is you don't want to pile things on top of them. You don't want a pile of pumpkins in your basement. You want them kind of separated out so that there's space for airflow to happen to prevent rot. But right now, we're gonna go ahead and use this guy. We're gonna make a pie. First step when you wanna make a pie is to go ahead and cut this guy in half. Now, you're gonna want an exceptionally sharp knife. Think Michael Myers style. The sharper the better, because most injuries actually happen with dull blades. Because a dull blade is more likely to glance off the side of whatever you're trying to cut, whereas a sharp blade should just go right through it. So we want to actually cut it in half, just like this, so that the stem is on one side and the bottom part is on another side. You don't necessarily want to go through the middle. You certainly could if you wanted to, but there's no reason to work at trying to cut through that stem and that thick space. That's just unnecessary. What I tend to do is sort of use the point to get started. Just kind of make a little notch and then bring your blade, sort of the main body of the blade, into that notch there and just work it down. And be extremely careful of the hand that's holding your pumpkin stable. Again, this is why a sharp blade is going to be your best friend. And depending on how big your pumpkin is, you might need to sort of rotate as you're cutting. But again, before you move this pumpkin anywhere, stop moving the blade. Because again, you don't want to slice into your own hand. And you can just work your way around this pumpkin. So you've made it all the way around. I didn't quite line it up there. That's okay. Then you should just be able to get that right apart. There we go. Now your pumpkin is in 2 halves. The next step is to pull all the seeds and the pulp out. If you've ever made a jack-o'-lantern, you're familiar with this process. However, I am going to go ahead and stop you real quick because you should save the seeds. Whether you're wanting to save these to grow new plants next year, or whether you're wanting to save them to roast them and eat them, there's no reason to waste these. I honestly will often save some of them because I know I'm going to want to plant them. But if you have a pretty successful pumpkin haul, you're going to have way more seeds than you would ever need to plant. So I'll save the rest of those and roast them up. I will go ahead and do another video on that later about both saving the pumpkin seeds for growth and about prepping and cooking those pumpkin seeds for a snack. But in this video, let's just go ahead and get these out of here. I like to just try to pull the seeds out by hand first before, diving in with the spoon, because a lot of times they'll separate from most of that pulp pretty easily if the pulp is still well attached to the rind of the pumpkin. So I've got a colander over here. I'm just going to drop the seeds in there. And I'll put any of the gunk in my separate bowl over here. So let me go ahead and speed through this process so you don't have to watch me do this for 20 minutes or however long it's going to take me. Okay, so we fast forward through all of that. We now have our colander full of seeds and a bowl full of gunk. And that was just what I could get out with my hands. So I'm going to go ahead and use this spoon here and just try to get out as much of the slimy parts as possible. I'm not going to worry about it too much, and I don't want to dig too much into the flesh because that's what's going to make our pie. But I do want to try to get as much of that out of there as possible, just because it is kind of slimy and it doesn't really bake out. Like it just doesn't have the same consistency when it bakes as the rest of the flesh, and it's just not very nice. So I'm going to try and get that out as much as possible. And try not to take out too much of the flesh. We want guts, not flesh. Think of it like a bad horror movie. You get all the blood and guts and stuff, but not too many flesh ones, you know. Sometimes you get chunks of flesh flying around in those movies, but we're not going to do that here. Low budget. All right, that's actually pretty good. So there's the inside of our pumpkin. And I'm going to go ahead and just set him here on this tray that has foil on it. And it can just sit directly with the cut side down. I'll go ahead and clean this guy out real quick. This one actually doesn't have as much as the top side did. But then once that's done, these guys are ready to go in the oven. There we go. Now that one's ready. So there's these guys set up on my tray with aluminum foil down there just to make for easy cleanup. And I'm going to go ahead and get up and get these put in the oven, and we'll be ready to bake them. We'll be right back. Put the pumpkin in the oven at 350 degrees for 1 hour. That should about do your average sized pie pumpkin. If you have an exceptionally large pumpkin, it may take a little bit longer, but start with an hour and then check on it. Okay, so my timer has gone off. It's been 1 hour. I'm going to use a sharp knife and just kind of poke that. Oh yeah, see how that knife went right in without even really trying? That's ready to go. So we'll go ahead and get these pulled out and let them cool off a little bit. And here we have our lovely pumpkin, fresh out of the oven. Well, not too fresh. I did let it sit to cool down for a minute before getting set up for this. But you'll see that it has kind of collapsed a little bit after roasting. That's perfectly normal. That just means that those fibers are breaking down, which is what we want. We're going to take the flesh out of this pumpkin. So we'll go ahead and pick this guy up. It's pretty hot still, so be careful. But, ooh, yeah. See the steam coming off there. Oh, it smells amazing. And stem just kind of broke right off. That's good. We'll just set that off to the side, out of the way. And then just grab a large spoon and kind of go around the skin. You don't really want the skin. It just doesn't break down very well. It's not pleasant to eat. Just try to get the flesh. And we'll just scoop that right there into a container. I like to go ahead and put mine just directly into a Tupperware because a lot of the time I'll end up roasting a pumpkin not on the same day that I'm making whatever I'm making with it. And that way I can put it in the refrigerator as soon as it cools down with a lid on it, and it'll stay good for a couple of days. So if either I started later in the day and I'm just not feeling like going through the whole process today, or maybe I'm doing several pumpkins because I'm trying to do a big project, it's just convenient to go ahead and put it right into a Tupperware. And now I'm going to go ahead and speed this footage up so you don't have to see me sit here and scoop flesh out of a pumpkin for 20 minutes or however long it's going to take. And there is an empty pumpkin skin. It's kind of cool looking. It's kind of leathery. Yeah. There you have it. Skinned pumpkin. And now for the other side. Okay, and there's the skin from the bottom of the pumpkin. You can really scrape this all the way down to the very base of that skin. If it starts to tear, go ahead and just pull that part off. You don't really want to eat the skin, but I mean, you can scrape pretty darn close if you've cooked it properly. Now we've got this lovely tub of pumpkin flesh. Turned out to be quite a good amount for that pumpkin. I'm really pleased with that. And I'll go ahead and let that cool down. We'll get set up for making a pie. Okay, so we have our flesh cleaned out of our baked pumpkin and we are ready to actually make the pie. Now I went ahead and ran that flesh that I cleaned out of the pumpkin through my food processor here. You can use a blender, or if you don't have either of those things, you can actually just kind of mash it up with a fork in a bowl until it gets kind of smooth. You'll never really get to the same smooth consistency as using something with a blade like this, but it would work in a pinch. What we need to do first is add our brown sugar. So we have here 2/3 a cup of very well packed brown sugar, dark brown sugar. I love that, don't you? It just stays whole. So there's that. And then I actually have 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour as well that I'm going to go ahead and put in there. We'll just kind of mush those together. Break up that brown sugar. I'm not going to worry about it too much because we're going to do a lot more mixing in a minute. Now it's time to add the spices. And I use 5. Nutmeg, cinnamon, cardamom, cloves, and ginger. And then we will need to add just a little bit of regular table salt as well. 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. My teaspoon doesn't actually fit inside of the jar, so I'm just going to do 2 1/2 teaspoons here. 1/2 teaspoon of cloves, 1/2 teaspoon of ginger, 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, and 1/4 teaspoon of cardamom. Now we're going to mix all this together. Now it's time to add our pumpkin puree. I want 2 cups of this pumpkin puree. If you're using a pie pumpkin for this, you're probably not going to get too much more than 2 cups. So this should be about perfect for 1 pie. 1 pumpkin, 1 pie. I'll have a little bit of leftover, but I can use that for something else. Make sure you scrape out your cup. You want all that pumpkin-y goodness. All right, we'll go ahead and get that mixed in there. You can absolutely use a mixer for this to make life easier. I just don't have one, so I'm mixing it by hand. Old school. Just like a witch in her cauldron. Stirring it all up. Okay, now we actually need to grab some maple syrup. And I want 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. There's 1 and 2. And I do recommend actual maple syrup rather than sort of the maple flavored high fructose corn syrup stuff that you can get a lot cheaper. I mean, you can use that if that's what you have on hand. It'll still work, it just won't be quite as good. So just get all the maple syrup out of there. I'm just gonna hold that over top so it can still drip out. If I've measured it, I want it. All right, and then we need 4 large eggs. Whoop, there it went. Along with a little bit of shell. That's okay, I can pull that out of there. 2, 3, and 4. All right, break up those yolks, and let's get this mixed in here. All right, that might not be mixed all the way in, but that's okay, we're not quite done. There's one more ingredient, and that is evaporated milk. 1 entire can of evaporated milk. Now, if you don't have evaporated milk, whipping cream is actually a pretty decent substitute. All right, and this is gonna look really thin, but that's okay, because this is basically kind of a custard. Pumpkin pie is essentially a form of custard pie in a way. Okay, now that this is a nice, even, consistent color, we are ready to put this in the pie shell. I'll scrape off my spatula a little bit here. We'll pull this pie shell into frame. There we go. This is a store-bought pie shell. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. If you want to make a pie, you make it. And if you need to just buy store-bought dough because you don't feel like making pastry, there's nothing wrong with that. So we're going to go ahead and just carefully pour this in here. It might seem like it's too much at first, and it'll fill all the way up to the top, but should be fine. You know what? I'm going to have just a little bit left over that's not going to go in there. That's okay. If you want to, you can actually pour this into a little ramekin and throw it in the oven as well. Just keep a close eye on it so it doesn't overcook. You got a little mini pumpkin pie. Put the pie in the 450-degree oven for about 10 minutes. And then you're going to want to drop the temperature down to 325 Fahrenheit for about 40 minutes. It's going to depend on your oven, so pay attention to it and keep an eye on it. Make sure it doesn't start looking really dark and burning. When your pie comes out of the oven, it might be a little puffed up. That's totally normal. It'll kind of sink as it cools. So we'll check back in on this in just a little bit. And there we have it. Our lovely homemade pumpkin pie with homegrown pumpkins. Now, when I turned the temperature down, I did have this in for 40 minutes and then I checked on it. Because ovens vary, I want to start with just the 40 minutes because yours might be done right about that time. I ended up putting mine in for another about 20-25 minutes after that. What you're looking for is when you reach in and you kind of give it a little shake, you don't want it to be really sloshy. You want it to have just the slightest bit of a wiggle in the middle there. That's when you know it's done. Don't put anything through it like you would a brownie or something like that. We're also going to do one extra step. You don't have to. This is absolutely ready to eat right now. But what I'm going to do is brulee the top with sugar. Hence my lovely torch that I got out of my garage and bowl of sugar. You do want the pumpkin pie to be completely cooled by this point. I actually put mine in the refrigerator with some plastic wrap over top of it overnight. You can do it the same day if you bake it early in the day, but you do want this pie to be completely cooled and even in the refrigerator for at least 2 hours. If it's still hot, what will happen is it's still producing steam, and if that steam kind of comes up underneath the sugar, then it doesn't work very well, basically. Also, if you're making this a day ahead or two for an event or something like that, and you know you're not going to be eating it right away, don't brulee the top until right before you're going to serve it, because otherwise that sugar will just get kind of gummy and sticky and like soak into the pie a little bit, and it's just not very good. So we're going to get this guy bruleed so we can eat it tonight. All we have to do is grab just some regular white granulated sugar, and you want to just really lightly kind of sprinkle the top. Try to be fairly even, but I mean it's not the end of the world if you've got a few thick spots. Just don't have it be super thick to where you can't see the pie anymore underneath it. Okay, that's about good. So there's my pie with my sugar on top. I'm going to turn this on. You just want a low flame. You don't need this to be, you know, flamethrower style. Just a low flame. And you're just gonna kind of kiss the top. So you just want to melt those sugars. And keep your flame moving, even if it seems like it's not melting it just yet. You don't want to end up with too much of a hot spot or you will burn that sugar. So see, it's kind of start to melt away a little bit, kind of beat up. That's good. I'm actually going to go ahead and rotate this just to try to get even heating. Keep your hand away from the flame. This is definitely an adult job. Don't have the kids do this. But you'll see that start to melt. And kind of beat up a little bit. You also want to kind of avoid the crust a little bit because you can easily start to burn the crust. But you'll see it kind of start to caramelize and go a little bit golden. That's a good sign. If it starts to get dark, that means it's burning. You don't necessarily want that. Yep, I think that's about good. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my flame off there. There we go. And there's my brulee pumpkin pie. You won't necessarily see it too much on this as you would like with a standard creme brulee because that's white underneath. And since the pumpkin's already kind of the same color as caramelized sugar, it's not necessarily going to look the same. But once that cools down, that'll form kind of a hard crust sort of on the surface out of sugar. And then when you cut into it, you'll feel that kind of crack. And then you've got that layer of delicious caramelized sugar on top of your pumpkin pie. So there we have it. I'm going to let this guy cool down a little bit. I'll cut a slice, show you what that looks like. And that's all there is to it. You have now made a pie using a pumpkin that you grew in your own backyard. Or that you bought at the store. Either way. Until next time, my darlings. Rest in peace.